Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be giving my thoughts on The Well of Ascension, the second book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. After I read the first book, The Final Empire, I did a full spoiler-free review, which I was happy to do because I had a lot of thoughts. It was my return to Brandon Sanderson after having wondered if potentially he was the author for me, if I was going to enjoy the Mistborn series and his other works. And I had a lot of fun recording that video. I don't think that I have enough to say that is spoiler-free to record a full spoiler-free review for this one, but I will give a couple of spoiler-free thoughts at the beginning, just in case you are interested in my opinion and you haven't either finished the book yet, or you're unsure if you want to read the whole series, or you know that this can be a divisive one and you just want to see which side of the debate I fall upon. So I will give some brief spoiler-free thoughts, and then this will mostly be a spoiler-filled review. So just in general, this book took place about a year after the end of the first novel, The Final Empire. And we are thrown into a lot of political intrigue. So the crux of this book is that after the events of book one had transpired, our group of characters needs to decide what to do next and in what direction they are going to move. There is a lot of political intrigue. This is very heavy on the political machinations. There's a lot of slow-moving pieces. There are various groups of people that all have different goals, that have different views, different expectations for how the world is going to work after the events of the Final Empire. And we need to follow that and see where we fall on that side of the debate, what we are looking forward to. Do we feel like our characters are doing a good job? Are they doing a bad job? And how is the trauma that they are experiencing from the events of book one, how do their personalities reflect what is going to happen in the world? And how does that work for the greater good? And how does that actually hinder our heroes as we follow them through? So the premise is pretty interesting. And I think that the book definitely shies away from that middle book syndrome. This does not feel like a bridging book. I do have some issues with The Well of Ascension, and I'll talk about those when I get into the spoiler parts, but to me, this did not feel superfluous. There were events, there was character growth, there were choices that Brandon Sanderson made that felt very integral to the part. They felt necessary. So I did not think that this suffered from any sort of middle book syndrome. I think, or at least I imagine, that Brandon Sanderson had plotted out this story quite intricately, that he knew exactly which pieces he wanted to take place in which novels, and I do think that they all thread together into a greater narrative, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how that narrative comes together. And that's really what keeps me reading with Brandon Sanderson. There are a lot of choices that he makes as an author, and a lot of them are technical. I think for Brandon Sanderson, the things that he does really well with, the strengths that he has as an author, don't necessarily pull on my own particular reading tastes. But the thing that keeps me going in his books, and the reason that I want to continue with his series and go on to read more of his work, is because I do like that intricate plotting. I find it very satisfying to see the pieces that he has put together, the clues, the mystery that he has built along the way, and I do think that it will be very satisfying to see that all come together in book three. I still trust that that is going to happen in a way that is enjoyable for me, but that being said, I struggled with this book. And I struggled for a number of reasons. I think some of them were very personal to my particular reading taste, and I think some of them were just issues that feel a little bit more universal, that probably some people don't really care about that much and can ignore, but I do think were detrimental to the plot and to the story overall. So if you are just here for kind of my spoiler-free thoughts, I will say that I fell pretty squarely in the middle on Well of Ascension. If I were to give it a star rating, I would probably give this 3 out of 5 stars. There were parts that I really enjoyed. There were some character moments. There was some plot progression that I found very satisfying. And then there were certain characters, certain narrative choices, and certain writing techniques that really did not fit my personal taste. And as I was reading through the book, every time I picked it up, I was happy to read it. Every time I was reading through, I thought, this is enjoyable. I'm enjoying finding out what happens next. I wonder what is going to happen to this character. But then every time I put it down, I thought, if I was never allowed to pick up this book again, I don't think I would lose a lot of sleep over that. So it was just a very apathetic approach, I guess. I was happy enough to read it. I probably wouldn't have been very sad if I didn't get to finish it. That being said, I think that by the time I finish this series, just from the way that I have seen things play out in book 1 and book 2, I do think that for me personally, the series is probably going to be more than the sum of its parts. I am predicting that I'm going to like Mistborn as a trilogy more than I liked any of the individual books. Obviously, there's no way to know that for sure until I get through the 3rd book, but that is my prediction for myself. And now I just want to go straight into the spoilers for this video because I have a lot of things that I would like to discuss. And I think the easiest way to start this out, I talked about some of the setup that I enjoyed at the beginning of the video, and I'd like to talk about some of the things that did not work for me. The reasons that I did feel somewhat apathetic about reading this and some of the things that did not appeal to me personally. And the first reason for me is I felt like there were too many moving parts in this book. This was not a short book. I mean, it is a tiny printing, but it's still like, almost 800 pages. But I honestly think that in order to be satisfied with all of the pieces that Brandon Sanderson had moving at the same time, I probably would have liked to have a book that was double the length. Either that or to switch this over to a quartet and to have made the middle book into 2 separate books and go from there. But we had a lot going on here. So first we had the fallout. So we had the fallout of Kelsier's death and how that had implications, how that affected the various members of the crew, but especially how that affected Vin. So we ended the last book with this hugely emotional, momentous occasion. We had the defeat of the Lord Ruler, we had the death of Kelsier, and there's so many conflicting emotions that arise from that. We got to skip over that year-long period of where the interim government is trying to find its feet, a lot of the forming of those laws, and I thought that that was a good narrative choice. I was happy that we had gone forward in time a little bit because it did save Brandon Sanderson from having to give us that really intense emotion that I'm sure would come up after events such as those, but that doesn't mean that there's still not a lot for our characters to work through. They are very much finding their footing in a kingdom that is ruled by a nobleman. So Elend is now king, and the Kelsier's crew really needs to adapt to that idea, which they do with varying success depending on which member we're talking about. But that was an entire subplot in and of itself. Then we have the idea of these opposing armies. So we have the 3 armies that are camped outside Luthadel that are all vying for the crown in various ways. And that is a huge part of the story as well. Then we have the idea that there is a traitor in the midst of the group. And this occupies a lot of Vin's thoughts because obviously the plans of what they're doing are getting communicated back and forth. There's someone who's sabotaging them from within the grounds. So that is an entirely other subplot that we have to deal with. And then we have kind of our overarching plot, which I tend to think of as the main plot of the books, which is this idea of the deepness, what the defeat of the Dark Ruler actually means, what the Dark Ruler was doing, what is Vin's role in everything that is happening. And that is definitely the thing that I am most interested in. But I felt like I didn't get enough time with any of these plot threads because we had so many perspectives, we had so many encampments and so many points of view and so many opposing views that we had to learn and appreciate in order to feel invested in the story, that it was just too much. And I don't mean too much because, I would not be surprised to find a comment that said, well, if you couldn't keep track of it, then maybe you should be smarter. It's not that I couldn't keep track of everything that was happening. It's that I wanted more. I actually felt like some of the plot threads, some of the subplots were too simplistic. They were not explored as deeply as I would have liked. For example, the idea of the traitor in the midst. That's a really compelling subplot. Thinking that some member of your team has been killed and that there is an imposter in their stead. That someone who you care for, someone who has been there for you throughout this entire tumultuous time of your life. But I never felt emotionally invested in that because it would pop up, every couple of chapters or maybe like once or twice in each section of the book, just reminding us that this is something that Vin needs to figure out. But I never actually felt emotionally connected to that subplot. And I think it's because there was just so much happening. Similarly, it was hard to face any of these events like a mystery because I felt like we didn't get enough clues. We weren't really privy to enough information in order to make educated guesses. And then I thought that led to some really heavy-handed writing on Brandon Sanderson's part. I feel like because we didn't have enough time to really explore that subplot, he kind of bashed us over the head with several characters who were supposed to suspect for, a chapter or two, which makes me very suspicious that they are unlikely to be the traitor. And to me, there was only one real contender for the traitor, and that was the person or the individual that the traitor ended up being. So there were a couple of lines about the Kandra contract that made me suspicious of Tensoon, and there wasn't really anybody else who was close to Vin or within that circle of people that could have been privy to all of the information that Vin had. So that felt very unsatisfying to me, and I just personally felt like there was too much happening without enough time spent on each individual thread. So I would have preferred if some of the subplots would have been fleshed out a little more, if there were, if we had a bigger page count or we were able to devote a little bit more time to that. Similarly, I really struggled with the antagonists in this book. There's a lot happening. So we have this opposition of ideals, which provides us with a lot of the tension. And I think on its own could have provided a lot of the tension because we have Ellen, who's this very idealistic but privileged nobleman who has been made the figurehead of this new movement after the death of the Lord Ruler. And he's starting to find out that despite the fact that the Lord Ruler was a tyrant, he was able to maintain peace, such as it was, in a way that is now crumbling. And so while Elend has the heart and he has the ideals and he has the purpose, he's not doing a great job at executing that. And for me, that would have been enough tension. I would have been happy with that. I didn't need to have, various armies encamped on the outskirts, but I also understand that this is a time of great shift in the kingdom, that this is a calamitous occasion, and there are going to be people that are vying for power. So while I would have been happy with just that internal struggle, I do understand why this happened. I think that's a very realistic portrayal of a kingdom trying to piece itself back together. But with the three armies, I thought that each of the leaders of these three armies, so we had Straff and we had Set and then we had Jasts. I'm not really sure how we're supposed to pronounce his name, but Ellen's friend. So we have the three of them. And to me, they felt more like figureheads. They felt more like, I don't know, they were just a token for us to learn more about the world. So Ellen's friend's army was clearly just a way to introduce the Kolos into the story. And we got like a 2-line throwaway about his family being slaughtered because he was idealistic, and then all of a sudden he turns into an insane madman who wants to inflict this kind of cannibalistic race on the people that he grew up beside. I did not find that an entirely convincing backstory. I think that it had the elements that could have made it a realistic backstory, but I wasn't given enough in order to buy into that. So to me, he just became this piece on a board that allowed me to find out about the Kolos and then how that they fit into the greater world building of of Luthadel and of Mistborn in general. Then we have Set, who again felt a little bit just like a maniacal villain. He wanted to save his country. Again, he cared for his daughter. There were pieces of his personality that could have made him feel very nuanced, but with the amount of page time that he gets and how he intersects into the story, I didn't feel like I got that from him. He did not give me what I wanted. And then Straff Venture. All of the Ventures that I met in this book, aside from Elend, I did not enjoy, but we will talk about the third Venture afterward. Straff, again, felt too much like kind of that mustache tweedling villain. I could see, based on the type of person that he was, this very narcissistic person who's used to being in charge. He had a very important job before the fall of the Empire, and I can see how someone like him would be totally disgusted by what Elend has done to the city and the fact that these societal lines, these socioeconomic lines are starting to be blurred, or Elend wants to break them down and wants to create a more equal society. I can see how someone like Straff Venture would hate that. And I can see how he would believe that he's the best person for the job. And he obviously has the resources and he has the manpower to participate in this siege on the city. But I found him to be, at equal turns, a very shallow villain, and then someone who had way too much insight into his own psychology and utilized that very poorly. And this leads into some of the issues that I have with Brandon Sanderson's characterization and the way that he writes characters in general. But there were points in this book, and I remember discussing these in Discord because I found them so frustrating. So there's a scene in the book where it's the scene where Elend and Vin go to Straff's tent to meet with him. And Straff thinks that he's just going to kind of bulldoze over them. He is going to trap them. He is going to give them no choice but to surrender the city, potentially kill Elend and Vin at the same time. And he ends up foiled in that plan, and he's very upset about this, which again, very realistic reaction. But in his anger afterwards, he calls one of his servant girls and he wants to go to bed with her and notices that she looks like Vin. And he has this like very bizarre scene where he thinks like, oh yes, she has thwarted me, so now I will take advantage of this girl who looks exactly like her, and thus I will make my superiority clear to myself. And there may be people who are that attuned with their own defenses, with the way that they lash out when they're upset and they're hurt. But I find it very difficult to believe that someone with the personality of Straff Venture could be that transparent in his own acting out. And that if he was, that he would give in to that impulse, because I think that the kind of person that he is would balk at that. I don't think that he has that level of understanding into what he's doing. I don't doubt that he would do that. I just find it strange that we get this kind of internal villain monologue that kind of holds our hand to tell us why he is doing that. I don't think we need that. I think as readers, we're able to figure that out. And I don't like that kind of hand-holding. And I have found that Brandon Sanderson does that a lot. He will give you these insights into what his characters are thinking when they are parts of their personalities or they are actions that we probably could have deduced those things on our own. And that is a personal pet peeve. I do not like that kind of hand-holding in fiction. I don't want to be told why people are doing the things that they're doing. I want to recognize that people are doing these things and think, yes, Brandon Sanderson, you have drawn a very complex character here. I can see why this is happening, or I can speculate. I can wonder if maybe this is what is driving this action behind the character. But I don't want there to be what is essentially like an aside in a Shakespearean play where the villain is kind of like, yes, and now I do this and this will be great. Mwahaha. Like I did not get any enjoyment out of that, and it made for villains that I did not particularly care for. To me, the most compelling villain, if we want to call it that, is the idea of the deepness, which is again something that preoccupies a lot of Vins and Sazed. If someone knows a proper way to pronounce that, if you've listened to an audiobook or something, then please let me know below so I can pronounce it correctly. But that's what it seems to be. But Vin and Sazed spend a lot of time contemplating what the deepness is, what it means, why it's dangerous. And again, to me, that was the most compelling part of the plot. And I think that's why I'm going to end up liking the series as a whole, probably a little bit more than I like the books individually, because I do find that really fascinating, that really unique world building that Brandon Sanderson has going on. I really enjoy it, and I wish that there could have been more focus on that throughout the novel. And I think just piggybacking off of those villains, just those are the issues that I have with the kind of greater characterization at large. This is something that bothered me a little bit in the first book and definitely continued to bother me in this book. After spending so much time with these characters and getting to know some of them really well, I feel like I should be more emotionally connected to them. The only character that I felt a strong emotional connection with in this book was Tensoon, the Kandra. And I think part of it is because I just think that they're a really cool race. I think that Brandon Sanderson came up with something really fun, and I want to know more about their lore. I want to know more about their contract. I want to know more about their powers and their weaknesses. I thought that all that was really compelling. I also thought that Tensoon was a great window into Vin's psychological state. We get to see Vin change and grow through the lens of Tensoon, and those were some of my favorite parts of the book, when they were conversing, when they were helping one another, when they were forming this kind of tentative allyship. And this is why this is probably has a lot to do with why I suspected Tensoon to be the traitor, because I knew that it would hurt the most, and others seem to just want to inflict maximum damage. So that was one of the reasons why I felt suspicious, but I was really sad. And at the same time, I was kind of happy because we saw Tensoon reach out to Vin and do what they could within the confines of that contract, and that was really fascinating stuff. I loved it. I have no idea if Tensoon is going to be in the next book. I really hope so, or at least that there's going to be more about the Kandra in general. I hope it's not just a cool piece of world building or a cool piece of lore that, makes the world seem a little bit brighter and invites us into the world a little bit more, because I really, really loved that character and I would like to see them. But I feel like I should love some of the other characters as well. There were a bunch of people who died in this book, and I just didn't care. And I don't mean that in like a callous way, but I cry a lot. Like, a lot of books make me cry. Usually deaths in books I do find really upsetting. We spend a lot of time with these characters. We get to know them. But there's something about the way that Brandon Sanderson writes his characters where I know that there's a good foundation. I know that there's a good skeleton. Clearly he has put thought into things. He takes the psychological state of his characters very seriously. He builds up convincing backstories. He makes them act and react in ways that I think are realistic. But there is, and I think it's because I don't connect well with his writing style, there is a wall between me and his characters. And I do not know how to bridge that gap. And it makes me feel not as emotionally connected. I really want to love Vin. I want to love Elend. I wanted to love the members of the crew. But I like them. I think they're interesting. But I don't feel particularly emotionally connected to them. And that made it a struggle for me to love this book the way that I wanted to. So now that we're talking about characters, we have to talk about the biggest problem that I had with this book, and that is the character of Zane. And I believe that, although it's hard for me to fathom, I think that this is a pretty divisive issue. I think there are a lot of people who enjoy Zane and then a contingent of people who do not enjoy Zane. Because of the part of BookTube that I am on, I assumed that everybody disliked Zane, because I just remember Alan's rants, and I've heard a lot of other people not enjoy that character. But even in Discord, there was kind of a pro-Zane, anti-Zane group. So I will just try to explain the reasons why I did not feel like Zane was a good addition to this book and why he actually hindered my enjoyment. First of all, I didn't think that he accomplished anything worthwhile in terms of advancing Vin's character. Zane is a character who is introduced and killed in the same book, so we should expect that from his character being placed in the book, he is serving some sort of purpose. There is a function to his character. And since his only interactions are really with his father, who we already know is a huge creep and not a nice person, and Vin, we can probably make the jump that he is in the book to serve as, someone to help Vin's character move forward. And while Vin does move forward because of her interactions with Zane, and the fallout from his death does kind of snap something inside her, I think that she actually did much more character growth and discovered a lot more about herself as a person through her interactions with other characters. I already mentioned her relationship with Tensoon. I thought her relationship with the Kandra was much more profound than her relationship with Zane. I think Zane served to show us Vin's insecurity, which we already knew about. Seeing Elend come into power and having Vin on the outskirts of that, we could already feel her anxiety about her place in this kingdom, losing Kelsier and seeing this new religion come up and how uncomfortable she is regarding her role in this religion. We got to see some of the internal struggle that she's having. I don't feel like Zane introduced anything new. I think he just served as a source of drama. He served to heighten some of those really intense emotions, which I don't really think needed to be heightened. And so to me, he was just this figure that took up valuable page space that I would have felt was better served exploring some of the plot threads that I really did feel interested in. I think that Brandon Sanderson's dialogue, which I have struggled with in the past, was exceptionally poor in terms of how he wrote Zane. Some of the lines were absolutely cringeworthy. I had a really hard time taking some of the really important things that he was saying seriously because of the delivery and because of the way that he said them. So it was just a character that I did not enjoy. I struggle to understand what function he served in the book. I think I know maybe why he was put in there, but I just don't think it was necessary. But I am always open to other people's opinions. I would love to know even if you didn't enjoy Zane, do you feel like he did serve a good function in the plot, the greater story? Or if you did enjoy Zane, what are some of the reasons that you did? One of the things that I really struggled with, and this is the last Zane point, as I read through the book, is this notion of Zane's insanity. So I am obviously hyper aware whenever there's anything related to mental health, mental illness, any diagnosis of that sort, because that's what I do every day. And from the beginning, Zane's insight into the fact that he was hearing a voice and that he was having someone control him completely counteracts the idea that he could be suffering from any sort of psychosis. People who suffer from psychosis do not know that it is not real. They do not understand that this is something that is outside the realm of what is possible. And Zane just had a lot of insight into this, and it really frustrated me throughout the novel that it felt gimmicky. Now, by the time I got to the end and we saw how Marsh was reacting, how the other Inquisitors were reacting, we found out about what the deepness truly is and how that was kind of pulling everyone in. I can see that clearly there was some other being behind what Zane was experiencing, but up until that point, I just found it to be very frustrating, kind of gimmicky presence. I do think that it will probably have greater implications on the world building, which I'm happy about because I tend to think that Brandon Sanderson does a really good job portraying characters with mental illness who struggle with their mental health. And this felt very different from all of the other instances where he had utilized that. But I understand now, or at least I expect that it was purposeful, and it doesn't irritate me as much as it did, which is why it's always good to wait until the end to make any value judgments. But I still don't think that it was necessary to have Zane there. We are getting, obviously, some of this subplot from Marsh with his strange behavior. He seems to be reacting to some sort of internal stimulus. So I think that we could have gotten that without having the character of Zane. But if you disagree, then please feel free to tell me why. Now, that was a lot of discussion about the things that I did not like. I think that can be helpful. It can be cathartic. I do want to discuss these things, and not just in a, I need to be anti-Brandon Sanderson because everybody likes Brandon Sanderson. No, I am also enjoying my time reading Brandon Sanderson, but I think this is just, it's good to talk about some of the things that we struggle with. And if you are following along on the channel because you feel like your tastes align with mine, then it's also good to let you know the things that I did not enjoy. That being said, there was lots in this book that I also really loved. I talked about the Kandra, high point of the book for me. Really loved that subplot. I really loved those interactions. I felt like that helped grow Vin as a character and make me feel more connected to her. I also really, really liked the action. Brandon Sanderson, he puts together these intricate plots where they kind of build slowly and then obviously snowball at the end. I did not find the kind of Sanderlanche as epic as I did in book one. I think it's because it kind of took part in phases. There was like a kind of a mini one and then a space and then another mini one. But I did find the ending to be really exciting. I'm very interested to see what happens with Elend now that he seems to be an allomancer. I am very interested in this new being that has been released with the deepness. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that I'm looking forward to reading. But I did enjoy that whole process. The end of the book was definitely enjoyable. I really loved Vin's combat. I would love to see that animated. It put me in mind a lot of Attack on Titan. So I had discussed this with Petrick after book one. The way that the Mistborns use their coins to kind of propel themselves through the air reminded me a lot of the kind of visuals of how people move around in Attack on Titan, which is a part of that show that is done really, really well. So I loved seeing it in the book. But in this book, where you get to see Vin fighting against the Kolos, where you get to see that kind of little Mistborn against these huge, massive foes, also reminded me a lot of Attack on Titan, and that was really, really cool. It was definitely action that I loved. I thought that the siege was very exciting, even though I didn't love the decision to have all of these armies camped out, or I would have liked to have, more insight into the individual armies. I did think that when they all came together and when that battle was happening, that it was really satisfying. I thought that was really fun. It was such an epic moment to see Vin kind of like charging in, and you have her believers who think that she's coming, and then her friends who have lost all hope and don't think that she's coming. And when she does come, it is definitely an epic moment. And I think that's what Brandon Sanderson does really well. That is what I do enjoy about his books, is that he clearly cares a lot about his storytelling, and that he is able to sow those seeds so that what you get at the end is just this completely overwhelming, epic conclusion that is always, at least in my opinion, really well done. And that made me excited to read the next book. So once I finished off with this one, I did feel really tempted to pick up the final book, because I think where the plot is going in book 3 are things that I'm going to be interested in. And again, just like I said in my review of book 1, if I enjoy that kind of culmination of events at the end, that kind of Sanderlanche that brings us into the end of a book, I can only imagine that what we are going to get at the end of the trilogy is going to be even more satisfying. So I am really looking forward to that. I still am, I think, lukewarm on Brandon Sanderson overall. I am going to continue to read his books. I think that I will be happy enough reading his books, but hasn't been anything so far that would make me feel that he would become one of my favorite authors of all time. Because of the things that I really like about his books, which is that kind of unveiling of all of the mysteries, that build up, that snowball effect, I also am not sure that they will have a lot of reread value for me, because once I already know about all those pieces, I don't think I will feel as invested in the story. If I'm going to go back and reread something over and over, I think it's got to be because I really love the characters and I want to be back in their heads and follow them again. So far, Mistborn has not done that for me, but I am very much looking forward to book 3. I'm excited to see how all of these threads come together, what he can weave with this story, and I am interested to see how his writing changes over time. I don't know if the issues that I have in Mistborn are going to be the same in the Stormlight Archive or even in Era 2. Everybody changes and improves over time, but I think that Brandon Sanderson has a really solid foundation. The things that he does well, he does, better than anybody else out there who's writing fantasy. And I am really glad that I have finally made the time to read his books. But That's it. Those are my spoilery thoughts for Mistborn Book 2. I'm looking forward to Book 3. I don't know if I'll read it later in December or if I'll read it early in the new year, but regardless, I am really looking forward to finishing it. And I will see you all with another video soon. Bye!